In case you missed it, here's a Sports Animal Rewind. Our Eye on the SEC is brought to you by Miller Eye Care and Optical, 694-2622.
We continue our previews of the Southeastern Conference teams in spring practice. We bring in friend of the show, covers LSU for TigerBait.com, Bryan Lazare joins us here on the new Sentinel Sports page. Bryan, Vince Ferrara, and Mike Strange. How are you, Bryan?
Good. How you guys doing this morning?
We are great, Bryan, and hope you are. There's obviously it kicks off today. There's a lot of excitement. You know, it was typical at Les Miles, as you well know, Bryan. Yesterday, saw his introductory press conference, and before he ever talked about his own team, he's talking about how exciting it was for Nicky Caldwell and the LSU. You're just going over all the sports. It's less is much less as always, right?
He hasn't changed very much, in his time here at LSU, and there's no telling, where he's going to start off with. If you noticed yesterday, you saw his left eye was he had a problem with it. Somebody asked him, and he said, "Well, I think I got a little case of pink eye." So he's not. When they go to practice today, Les won't be 100%.
Well, let's talk about this the signing class for LSU, the early enrolls. Who are some guys that you have an eye on that you're most intrigued to see among this group?
Well, they have 8 guys that have come in here and signed in January, and will go through spring practice. Some of the guys, some of the guys who may have bright futures may not necessarily be needed this year. If you look at what guys are going to contribute this year, first of all, there's Logan Stokes, who's a tight end junior college transfer, and LSU only has 2 returning tight ends on the entire roster, as far as scholarship players are concerned. So Stokes is someone who has an opportunity to show in spring practice that he's ready to get some playing time, and they need him to be able to get some playing time. Then you have Ethan Posick, who's an offensive lineman. He's a freshman out of Illinois. I would say that he's going to be right in the mix from the start. In fact, there's a possibility that when they start practice tomorrow, he could line up with the number 1 unit. So he's definitely going to be in the offensive line rotation. So he'll be somebody to watch. Then they have 2 freshman quarterbacks who are already in. Hayden Reddick from out in California and Anthony Jennings from Georgia. Now, obviously, neither of those 2 guys are going to, unseat Zach Mettenberger as the starter. But the derby for who starts at quarterback for LSU in 2014 will start this spring with those 2 guys, and then Steven Rivers. Rivers will be a sophomore this year. Les did mention yesterday that, Jennings, of the 4 quarterbacks, Jennings is the one that has mobility. And he hinted that there could be some type of package that they could implement with Jennings in a quarterback. So that's something that we'll have to watch. Fahoko Faneka is an offensive lineman, a junior college transfer. He's another guy that's coming in and has an opportunity to get into the two deep right away. So those are the primary, of the 8 enrollees in January. Those are 5 that certainly have a chance to step in and make an impact immediately.
We're getting an LSU spring football preview with Bryan Lazare from TigerBait.com and Vince Ferrara at the Knoxville Expo Center. Mike Strange covering the Tennessee men's basketball team at the SEC tournament. Mike?
I'm interested, Bryan, to know about what you think about Cam Cameron, a new offensive coordinator comes in. And if I'm not mistaken, the old offensive coordinator is still on the staff. How's all that work out? How much leeway does Cameron have with the offense?
Well, look, Les Miles is an offensive coach, so he's always going to have some impact on the offense, predominantly or mostly when you're talking about game planning. A lot of LSU fans think that he gets in there on game day and, nicks his play calls. He doesn't do all that. His influence comes in when it comes to the game plan. He and Cameron are close friends. They coached together for 7 or 8 years at Michigan. So there's a good relationship there. I think the biggest change that's going to happen is just the organization of the offensive staff is much better now. Because last year when you had Greg Studrawa, or the last 2 years after Steve Kragthorpe was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and Studrawa took over as the offensive coordinator, you had Studrawa, who was also the offensive line coach, handling the offensive linemen at practice. And then when games came, he was up in the press box calling plays, and he wasn't even down on the field with his offensive linemen, and there really was no other coach. So that didn't make any sense. Then the flip side, he's calling plays, and certainly your play caller has to have some type of relationship with your quarterback, and Studrawa was never with, Mettenberger this past year, or Jefferson or Lee the previous year, during meetings and things like that. It was, Kragthorpe was the quarterback's coach. So I think everything is more structured now. Studrawa goes back. He coaches the offensive lineman in practice. He'll be down on the field with the offensive lineman during the game. And Cameron, coach the quarterbacks, call the plays, and he'll be with the quarterbacks, at practice and the whole time. So I think that just this whole structure will improve, and I think that will help LSU.
Bryan Lazare from TigerBait.com joining us for our LSU team preview. What are some other interesting position battles you'll be keeping an eye on in camp, Bryan?
Well, obviously, John Chavis has his work cut out for him with him and the other defensive coaches. They've lost 7 starters on defense. 6 of the 7 had another year of eligibility, and all left for the NFL. So there's a lot of holes to fill. The whole starting defensive line is gone, as well as the number 3 defensive end. So there is a whole new front. They lose Kevin Minter, the middle linebacker, and then in the secondary they lose cornerback Darrell Simon and safety Eric Reed. So there'll be a lot of new players that are going to have to appear and contribute. I think the defensive line is the one area which has the most questions. There are 3 guys who have been part of the rotation for the last couple of years. Ego Ferguson and Anthony Johnson at tackle, and Jamario Rasco at end. Those 3 guys will definitely be 3 of the 4 starters. And it's time for those guys, all of whom were highly recruited, to go from being just role players or rotation players to guys who have to make plays. Those 3 guys had promising freshman years, but last year's sophomores, I think they all had rather mediocre seasons. Well, now it's their time that they have to step up and make some plays. The only other, if you say, okay, who else is going to play? Well, there's Danielle Hunter, who's a sophomore. He played primarily on special teams last year. He has a bright future of having built in along the lines of Arkevius Mingo. Now, who else is going to be in that rotation up front? Because they like to use 4 ends and 4 tackles. I have no idea. He's got a bunch of names and candidates, and you'll just have to see how that plays out. The linebackers in the secondary, even though, they lost 3 good players in Minter, Simon, and Reed, the depth there is pretty good, and I think they'll be fine at linebacker and in the defensive backfield. I think the main work for Chavis and his defensive staff in spring is finding guys who can contribute in the SEC on the defensive front.
Mike?
Just talk a little bit more about Zach Mettenberger and what he did last year, what his shortcomings were last year, and will he be a better quarterback going forward?
Well, first of all, I think Mettenberger was the victim of some great expectations. He came in here and everybody, was saying this guy was going to, save the program. He was called Messiah. Well, he was just a guy who came in and has a great arm, but like most quarterbacks who are starting for the first year in this league are going to struggle a little bit. And he was up and down, threw the ball a little bit better towards the end of the year, has a strong arm, has limited mobility, and I think that became quite apparent throughout the year, and I don't know how much better that can be. His leadership skills are something which, again, he needs to work on, and Les Miles talked about that yesterday. I hope that Mettenberger will be a better leader this year. And I think, he was a okay quarterback last year, but if LSU is going to contend in the SEC West this year for the title, he's got to be better than just an okay quarterback. He's got to be a very good quarterback, and if he doesn't have a very, very good season in 2013, I think you're going to see this LSU team, fighting to probably finishing with around about an 8-4 record.
Messiah. Good luck with that, right, Bryan?
Oh yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Cam Cameron deals with him. We've heard some reports that Cameron's got a little arrogance about him, and he's a pretty hard-nosed coach, and Mettenberger's a little bit of a free spirit. So it'll be interesting to see how those two guys, mesh, in spring and as we go on.
You need some help from receivers, right? You need more playmakers. So LSU needs more playmakers at that spot, right?
Yeah, all the top 4 receivers are all back. Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry will be juniors this year, and they're the top 2, and Kadron Boone and James Wright, a couple of seniors, are the 3 and 4 guys. Again, those guys were all okay last year, but they were very inconsistent. They all had stretches where they dropped passes. They all had stretches where they didn't run the proper route. Look, LSU going back, 6, 7, 8 years, you had a Dwayne Bowe, you had a early Doucette, you had a Reuben Randall. They don't have a player like that. They have all these complementary type receivers. So, you just hope that because all these guys now are juniors and seniors, that they're ready to make some plays. But, they don't have the NFL caliber receiver like they had for a number of years.
Bryan Lazare covers the LSU Tigers for TigerBait.com, does a fantastic job. Bryan, we really appreciate your insights, and hopefully we'll catch up with you again soon. Have a super weekend, Bryan.
You all have a good time, too. Thank you.
Thank you. That's Bryan Lazare, friend of the show, with our LSU preview.